first episode in this Drawing Fundamentals crash course. We're going to explore some shapes and angles, just not like that. If you want to do this course digitally, then you're going to need a graphics tablet and some software like this. If you want to do this course traditionally, then you're going to need some tools like these. So let's get started, shall we? Stay tuned. Yes mate, thanks for tuning in. I'm Renato and welcome to the first episode in the Drawing Fundamentals crash course. As always, this episode is powered by conceptstart.net, the place where you can go for some instant art inspiration. So throughout this series, I'm going to explore some golden nugget topics of drawing fundamentals, which is going to provide you with an excellent base to develop the rest of your artistic talents from. We're going to start out by exploring some shapes and angles. There's shapes in everything we look at, and by training ourselves through the act of observation, we can see these shapes and it will give us a better understanding of how to build the image up and essentially place our lines correctly and more efficiently. So let's get ready. We're going to start drawing some shapes. There's a generator with a link in the description, so you can check it out with some various tasks you can do to warm up with. If not, just draw your own, that's fine. But I'm going to show you a little quick demonstration. Take out the old pen, whack on. So here's some hints and tips when warming up. You want to stay loose with the arm and shoulder. Don't press too hard. You can experiment with different speeds and different lengths. Practice long lines and short lines, lines of equal size. Ghosting is quite a nice way to find the shape or line before you actually commit to it. So make sure you've done a range of motions and you're ready to go and you're on point, ready to let the lines flow. So now we're fully warmed up and we are ready to go and delve into the real learning, where it starts now. As I've been going over my notes and relearning things, I really wanted to package this course in a way that gets you thinking, starting with lines and shapes and then how everything builds on from that. Essentially, a line is a one-dimensional point. It's like the founding pixel of an image or a node or an atom, or the very smallest thing that you can find, or it's just on its own plane. It's one dimensional, a bit like my jokes. And then a series of lines merges into a shape, and that essentially is 2D, it's a two-dimensional form. And so if you could say we're going flat out. Oh man. So how do we approach drawing? Where do we start? Well, one of the most important things when it comes to drawing is to observe and plan. Whether we're drawing from life or imagination, everything is essentially a problem that needs a solution, and there's some key approaches to help us get there. One of the things I would actually call as the shape seeker is basically where we observe and seek out the key fundamental building blocks of an object and breaking it down into geometric shapes and then build it back up again. Really, we start with the big shapes and then we move on to the small shapes. We're kind of stacking shelves again, but stacking shapes basically. In the process, what we are looking to do is maintain the relationships between the different shapes in the form to establish its overall shape, really. So we kind of see the relationships between where one starts and one ends, and kind of build it up that way instead of seeing it as a whole. To break it down into its core fundamental components just makes it easier for us to digest and build it up and just get towards a more clear, concise and accurate portrayal of what we see. And that's the same for our imagination as well, obviously. Let's do a quick demo and show you how I would approach something like this shape seeker. Here we go. We've got a horse. Trace the shapes of a horse. A monkey. We're gonna imagine a monkey and consider what shapes make it up. And we're gonna find a picture of a monkey and then copy these shapes and do it that way and see how the results differ. And it's a good way to kind of find a middle ground of imagination meets observation.
Excuse me for dropping in. I sense a pattern developing.
So as demonstrated, by observing the subject, we can see how it's broken down into smaller components. So basic block shapes that we can build it back up into. Even negative space has a shape. And there's other ways that we can see shapes and forms. So this brings us on to the next demonstration, which is called the blocking. So in this approach, we want to seek out the boundaries of the shadows. So the edges of the shadows and the lines where it meets the light. This is what dictates the form of an object. Okay, so I've turned off a side light. Now you can see how the shadow around my face determines the volume. Down here, down the nose, and around, and we've got a little cleft going on there. So what we want to do is essentially trace the contours of the shadow lines and learn to observe subjects in this way. Alright, so now moving on to the demonstration for the blocking method. Now let's go into my generator. Alright, so we've got fruit block shadows. Cool. And then we're going to move on to the subject of the cat. Alright, so we're looking to establish a very rough blocking, looking for the most simple, efficient, angular shapes possible. And from there, we can determine the overall form. One trick you can do is to squint your eyes, and that really helps you just pick out the lights and darks. And then what we're going to do is refine those lines. We can start to carve out the more intricate details, so then we should have an image of a cat at the end. So some tips for approaching the blocking method. We want to look at the edges of the shadows, and we want to also observe the distance between the angles and the shapes. We want to observe the relationships between the angles of the shapes and the shadows, kind of use them as measuring plateaus. And remember, we want to be efficient with the lines. We want to find the most simple lines and just breaking it down into the most core angular shapes that we can find to describe the overall subject. So that's the blocking method. This is the end result. You don't need to worry about shading it in or colouring it in. All we're looking to do right now is observe the relationships between shapes and come to understand how to gauge the overall form of the subject and approach it with an accurate, methodical way. So this is the end of the shapes and lines introduction. I hope that this approach has been useful. I'm pretty sure you'll find it useful. I find it useful, and I will continue to push my understanding of shapes and form by using these simple observational techniques. I find the best drawings are the ones that invite the user in and retain the attention of the user through evoking certain emotions and a sense of believability. And I think this is done by the drawing fundamentals, so the building blocks of seeing the form, and one of the approaches we can do is the shape seeking method, building it up with the use of shapes and observing the relationships between the shapes that can provide a more accurate drawing and building blocks to place the lines on, and obviously the blocking method where we observe how shadows dictate the form. So thanks for tuning in. I really hope that this has been insightful and you've learned something and you're going to take something forward from this. Obviously it's all about improving and developing our skills as artists. So next episode is going to be on perspective, 1, 2 and 3 point perspective. So stay tuned for that, and I will see you later.